In fact, the next part here is, Joshua Pillow's comment on Bonson's, take on the cosmological argument. And he really makes two...
Stein's.
I'm sorry. Yeah, Stein's cosmological argument. Thank you. Yeah. He makes 2 points here with regard to Stein's argument. First, obviously, the one that we were suggesting, the nature of God. But second, also the nature of the universe, right? I mean, notice Stein tries to say perhaps the universe is one of those things which doesn't need a cause. Really? Are you really going to say that, right? And so this is what Joshua Pillows has to say. He says, apart from considerations pertaining to this argument broadly, this would be a blatant category error regarding the Christian God, right? Again, Stein has kind of defined the type of God that he's going to attack, but this particular argument doesn't deal with the Christian God, right? Why? Well, Pillows tells us that the Christian God is both self-existing, and not dependent on something else for his existence. And so the Christian God has necessary existence, absolute and eternal in all of his nature, right? So notice the problem here is that you can't just say, the Christian God was created if everything had a cause, right? Notice, so that's the first thing. Christian God doesn't have a cause, and no Christian would say, God was caused by something.
Right.
He doesn't believe that, and neither does Bonson. Neither of them believe that God was. So again, this is kind of a straw man type of, thing. No Christian believes that God was caused, right? God is eternal. He has necessary existence. He's self-existent. He's not dependent on anything else for his existence. So that's the first point. Secondly, the nature of the universe. The universe, Pillow tells us, is by definition contingent, right? So it's not, perhaps one of these things that doesn't need a cause. No, it's contingent. That is not having to have existed necessarily, right? It's dependent on something else for its existence. That's the nature of the universe, right? And therefore it needs a cause, which leads to the alternative premise that Stein doesn't give us, right? Stein says if everything, needs a cause, then God needs a cause. That's basically what he's saying. The argument, at least the way the Kalam argument is put together by, let's see, who's our good classical friend there?
Oh, William Lane Craig?
Yeah, William Lane Craig. Yeah. That's not the premise that he uses about the argument. He says everything that begins to exist must have a cause. So that's a totally different premise, and now that's a different kind of argument, right, than what Stein is telling us that the cosmological argument gives us. Yeah. So notice, if everything that begins to exist must have a cause, we can now say that God, the Christian God, never began to exist, right? The universe, we would argue then, is the second premise in the argument, began to exist. And therefore, now we have to show that that premise, too, is indeed the case, right? And so Stein, again, kind of, I think, misrepresents the argument here, right? Because of his thinking about his definition of God, right? That definition of God now has led him astray in terms of how this particular argument works. Now, I'm not going to say that, this argument is, foolproof and has no problems and that kind of stuff. In fact, Bonson doesn't even support this argument. But Stein hasn't given us the best version of this argument, all right? And I think it's based, either he deliberately didn't do it, or it's based on his, misunderstanding of who the Christian God is. I think that's wrong.
Well, and then just his understanding of the universe. I mean, this is 1985, right? So this isn't 1930s with the solid state model. The redshift has been discovered and found. The Big Bang
background radiation has been detected. Yeah. So all of these types of things show that the universe at least began to exist.
Right. Exactly. So this is a weird way to dunk on your opponent here.
Yeah.
All right, well, further commentary by Pillows, he goes on to say here that there are so many fallacies in the cosmological argument, it's incredible.
Okay, so this is important, right? Now, notice, as we suggested, even though Stein has given us a bad, kind of version of this argument, even if we use a better argument, Pillows is suggesting the argument still doesn't work. So it's not like he's trying to defend the argument, right? Stein gives us a bad version of the argument. Even if we have a good version of the argument, Pillows is suggesting it probably doesn't work. And so, right? So
Right.
why? Why doesn't it work?
Yeah. So he has three types of argumentations against the argument itself. First off is that it begs the question. So he asks the question, can I generalize from many observations that events have causes to all events that have causes? And he says, no, this is a fallacy. Now, it may work out in our minds. We may kind of grant the fact. But if we're talking logically with good premise and conclusions and a sound doctrine within there, to coin a phrase, then this would be kind of begging the question and not getting to where we want to be for the full bite of it.
And really, this is the problem of induction, basically. Right.
Sure.
Right. I observed this, therefore everything is like that. Well, no, just the things that you observe may be like that.
Right.
I can't say everything is like that.
Exactly. Which the problem of induction will definitely come up again for our atheist friends. How about the fallacy of composition? So he says, now if causation is a universal principle, can I say that because each event has a singular cause, that all events together have a singular cause? And he says no, so it's another logical fallacy. So it's not this piecemeal able to say then that all of those events together have a cause. And then the final issue that he has is with equivocation. Can I argue from what I know in my natural experience acts as a foundation for what must be true of the supernatural? Again, no. Our premises would mean one thing, and our conclusions would mean another thing when we talk about causes, because we're talking about two different realms there.
Right. And so he's suggesting that even if you clean up the argument that Pillows is telling us, that he still thinks that there's problems with this argument, right? So do we give that one to Stein? I don't know. I think Stein so, befuddled the argument that we shouldn't even give it to him. But anyway, Pillows wants to say, this is not a good argument for at least the existence of how the argument is put together. Is what he suggests.